right, moving on to collision avoidance. I always say the pilot's primary responsibility in any situation is to fly the airplane. That is primary responsibility. The pilot's second responsibility is to see and avoid. See and avoid other aircraft. See and avoid cloud. See and avoid obstacles and other hazards. Okay? Which means you have to look. You have to look out the window. Right? How many of you love staring at that beautiful screen in front of you and do my maneuver? You know, you're coming off instrument flying. Of course, you like to look at the screen. But as you get back into visual maneuvering, you have to know that you're doing visual maneuvers. I ought to be able to just cover up your primary flight display and have you do a steep turn all the way around. Oh my gosh, seriously? I can't look at the attitude indicator? Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why I make my commercial students do. I'll uncover it maybe about every 90 degrees or 180 degrees and see how they're doing. But that's what you ought to be able to do. Do a steep turn without referencing your attitude indicator. So if you're not there yet, if you're going, holy cow, I can't do anything without my attitude indicator, okay? That means you're too screen dependent there. That means your eyes are not outside enough, and you might become entangled with another aircraft, such as we see on the screen here. This is an actual picture from a fly-in event where two aircraft were approaching the land at the same time. They didn't see each other. Obviously, the worst situation, low wing on top, the high wing on the bottom, can't see each other. And they did entangle and come to rest on the ground on that. So keep in mind, these things do happen, right? These pilots were even using the radio, right? So accidents do happen, but we can avoid them, or we can mitigate the risk by making sure we're looking out properly. It is your responsibility to absolutely, positively see and avoid, right? Even during your instrument training, if you're in the cloud, ATC probably gave you traffic alerts. You probably responded IMC. That was fine, but they still give you them. The regs state that is the pilot's responsibility at all times, regardless of flight conditions, regardless if you are on ATC radar coverage. If you're on a head-on collision with an aircraft, you will note the moments before impact that the aircraft is blossoming, growing, it's motionless, but getting bigger in your screen, in your windscreen, that is. So keep that in mind. If that situation's happening, you have seconds to avoid that collision. You think about closing speeds. Think about two Cirrus aircraft, each of them doing 120 knots, and they're closing head-to-head on each other. That's the equivalent of 240 knots. Equivalent of 4 miles a minute being covered over the ground. It's pretty darn fast. You got to be looking out for these things. Distracted flying. Oh, there's so many things to distract us today in the cockpit. So many things. I mean, we have all these wonderful knobs and buttons in our cockpit, right? And the other day I was flying with a student, an early student, and they were trying to program in the altitude bug, and they're having trouble with it. And instead of just rotating the knob, they were trying to program in the numbers, which, okay, that's fine, you can do that. And it wasn't working for them. And they went from 2,500 feet over the gate all the way down to 2,100 feet. I'm just waiting, you know, another 500 feet, we'll start getting those low altitude warnings on the aircraft. I'm just waiting for this to happen, right? But it didn't. He finally found out that he was 400 feet too low. Why? Because he got distracted with programming the aircraft. Okay. There's other things that can distract us. ATC can distract us. Other aircraft can distract us. Our iPad can distract us. If we're trying to text on our phone in the airplane, that can distract us. But we want to not get distracted. It's something that's very unsafe operation and can get you into a lot of trouble as well. as it did this professional flight crew coming out of, I think, Arizona for Minneapolis a number of years ago. The crew ended up missing a frequency change from center when they're still kind of southwest part of the country over the plains area. And because of what they were discussing in the cockpit at the time, they got distracted and didn't recognize the frequency change was missed, and didn't recognize that they had never changed frequencies and were still back on one of the like Albuquerque Center instead of progressing through the different centers toward Minneapolis. And they were discussing company flight operations manual. And apparently they had a laptop open, and the laptop was also covering up some of their critical instruments inside the aircraft. And as this is what they tell us now, okay? You know, we will never know for sure because cockpit voice recorder only records the last 30 minutes of the flight. And they ended up overflying Minneapolis by 150 miles. Of course, ATC is wondering, do I have a hijacking in progress here? Do I have a crew incapacitated? They couldn't get a hold of the crew. But finally, when the crew realized that they had flown past their destination, they did get a hold of ATC. ATC had to go through some very specific maneuvers to verify that the crew was not hijacked, and then they brought them in for landing. Okay? Eventually, these pilots were fired for this. So it is very serious that you do not get distracted up in the airplane there. So what are some of the things that can distract us, right? Again, kind of highlighted programming the aircraft, automation, management, even frequency selection can distract us. You type something in and then it didn't go through for some reason, or you hit the wrong button. You probably have experienced that instrument approach that didn't activate. Something in how you programmed the FMS system didn't allow the approach to activate, and there you are trying to get it to activate, and you're right there at the final approach fix. You're supposed to be getting those flaps down, you're supposed to be descending, and here you are still trying to reprogram, and then you play Superman or Wonder Woman, and 2 miles past the final approach fix, you do that crash dive. I'm going to get down to minimums, even if it kills me, right? Yeah, don't be distracted on that. It's a programming area, it's a revector. Just remember that. Information management, there's a lot of information going on that can come your way. You have to know how to sort it or filter it. What's important, what's not important. Your workload can be a distraction. You know how it is. You're setting up for the instrument approach. You got checklists to do. You're dealing with ATC. You're controlling the aircraft. That's a lot to handle. And of course, your instructor will always be a nice person and give you something else to deal with, like alternator failure. Or maybe they'll, maybe you're in the simulator and they'll take away enough satellites so you don't have the required number anymore. You can't do the LPV minimums. You got to go to LNAV mins. Right? All that can be a distraction to you. So you have to learn how to deal with these things. Primary responsibility, fly the airplane. Second primary responsibility, see and avoid. We've all taught you the ABCs of flying. Fly the aircraft, fly it somewhere, and then communicate, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate. That's what it comes down to. Spins, let's get into some spins here. Unfortunately, we had our first successful spin of a Cirrus last semester. I don't know if you heard about that. The student was doing a stall, very poor recovery from the stall, very much uncoordinated. And the Cirrus did an incipient entry to the spin. So basically, just kind of winged over and dozed down. The instructor quickly took control and recovered the aircraft. It never entered a sustained spin at all. But these things do happen. Right? You have to be aware of it. You have to understand that that footrest under your right foot is not a footrest, it's a rudder pedal. You have to actually use it, you know, to keep coordinated. That's one of the things that gets you in trouble if you're not coordinated. So let's talk about spins here, right? first and foremost, you have to be stalled in order to spin. So that's the safest way to prevent a spin is don't ever stall the airplane. Maintain your flying speed. Unfortunately, we're a training organization and we intentionally stall aircraft. We intentionally fly them slow, right? So we have to then make sure that we don't aggravate that stall with an uncoordinated condition. So we have to make sure we're using proper rudder in the stall. Because if we don't use the proper rudder and we're aggravating that stall, one wing will stall before the other. And then any sort of improper recovery from the pilot at that point gets us into that stall spin situation. So pretty much two ingredients here, stalled and an uncoordination event to enter the spin. So be aware of that. You ought to know the generic recovery procedure. Your manufacturer has a specific procedure for the airplane that you fly, but in case they don't have one, here's the generic recovery procedure. PARE, P-A-R-E would be your easy to remember acronym. Setting the power back to idle, making sure the ailerons are neutral. Rudder is in the opposite direction to the spin. And then the elevator. You must push the yoke forward to break the stall. As far forward as you need to move it to break the stall. Then, of course, you have to recover from the resulting dive after that. So you should know about that. Okay? All right, top hat question coming your way. This is going to be a list of the recovery procedure for you to put in order. So you're going to have to learn how to drag around these things on your device there. So put the proper spin recovery in order. All right, get 1 minute on this one. Not working for you? Is it not working for anybody else? Anybody else have issues with that one? We'll have to try and sort that out later there, Shima. Okay. So PARE and then recover from the dive. All right, one more topic here on wind shear. After this, we'll take a quick break. Now, this is one of those hazards that is out there. We can predict when it's going to be present, but we can't see it. We don't know it. There might be some indications that might tell us where wind shear is located. Let's take a peek here at, wind shear is an abrupt change in direction or speed of the wind. Then you felt wind shear coming down in maybe mild forms of 3, 4, 5 knots, or it could be bigger forms of it where you get 10 knots of wind shear or even more. You would look for it if you're near a frontal system. Or if you're flying high enough to be near the jet stream. Be lots of shear going into or crossing over the jet stream. Mountains can produce that wind shear effect, as well as inversions. So often you're not going to be able to tell that it's there, but there might be some telltale signs of a wind shear event. Like in the picture here, we do see a cold winter day and we see the smoke rising from the factory, or the steam from the factory going straight up. That tells you surface winds are very calm. And if you see this situation develop where you have a horizontal flowing of the wind, you probably have an inversion going on that's trapping that layer. And there's the difference between the wind speeds. Calm winds all below it down here, but very high speed winds up above that inversion layer. So there could be some telltale signs out there for you.